welcome to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. The best solutions to life's problems are often the ones that sound like a kid cooked them up. For example, if the road is wet, let's aim a helicopter at the ground to try to dry it. That's kind of the plan on I-95. NASCAR is involved. But first,
the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel.
a voyage of wonder ends in tragedy as the Coast Guard discovers a debris field in the North Atlantic. President Biden rolls out the red carpet and the compressed watermelon for India's prime minister.
Bound by the same words in our Constitution, we the people.
And are you running for president? Another candidate joins the crowded GOP field.
Someone like me, right, a dark horse candidate can pull this off. You can't be afraid of Donald Trump.
But we begin our report with a catastrophic end to a deep-sea expedition.
On behalf of the United States Coast Guard and the entire Unified Command, I offer my deepest condolences to the families.
The Titan submersible went missing Sunday while on a journey to see remains of the Titanic. But on Thursday, it was remains of the Titan that were found deep in the Atlantic Ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard said it believes all 5 of the vessel's passengers are dead. Roxana Saberi is in Boston with Thursday's grim developments.
A tragic end to a frantic search.
This morning, an ROV, or remote-operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible.
The debris of the missing submersible Titan was found about 1,600 feet from the Titanic wreckage.
This is an incredibly unforgiving environment down there on the seafloor, and the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel.
The cause of the implosion is still unknown, but all 5 people aboard were killed. OceanGate founder Stockton Rush, billionaire adventurer Hamish Harding, Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Suleiman, and French explorer Paul-Henri Nargeolet. The Titan has been missing since Sunday, when it descended to the Titanic wreckage site about 2.5 miles beneath the North Atlantic, sparking a massive international search covering about 10,000 square miles. The company OceanGate Expeditions charges $250,000 to see the Titanic up close. Pierre Wimmer, an explorer himself, says he got to know the company's CEO, Stockton Rush, when he was considering a dive years ago.
Stockton obviously was a deep-sea explorer who did what few people have done.
But OceanGate has faced criticism from a group of experts in the submersible industry who wrote a letter to the company in 2018 warning of possible catastrophic problems. One of those experts, Will Cohen, said the Titan hadn't passed safety standards.
There are only 10 vehicles in the whole world that can go 4,000 meters or deeper, and all of them are certified except the Titan.
While Wimmer mourns for his friend, he believes this setback will not stop other people from deep water exploring.
We've never been held back by defeats along the way. The quest will continue for exploration.
And Roxana Saberi joins us now. Roxana, we're getting some news from the Navy about the submersible. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, John, tonight a Navy official told CBS News that the Navy detected what it called an acoustic anomaly consistent with an implosion after the Titan lost contact on Sunday. The official says the information was shared with the Coast Guard, which used it to narrow down the search area. Now, today, the Coast Guard said in a press conference that throughout its search, it had listening devices in the water, but did not detect any catastrophic failures. And it said for 72 hours, or about 3 days, it had sonar buoys in the water that did not detect any catastrophic events. John?
And so what's the next step now for the Coast Guard and its partners? I mean, will they continue looking for answers, or because of that unforgiving nature of the wreckage site, do they just start to pack things up?
Well, they have said that they're going to start demobilizing personnel over the next 24 hours. And they did say, as you just referred to, this is an incredibly difficult and dangerous environment to work in. But they are going to continue looking for answers. They say they're going to be analyzing the debris that was gathered at the search site. They said at least 5 main pieces of debris were found, including the nose cone of the Titan submersible and 2 ends of the pressure hull. They want to find out if or when if they can, find the bodies of the 5 victims. They don't have any sign of them yet, they say. And they say now that they found the debris, there will be an investigation into what happened. John?
And what more have you learned about the victims and their loved ones?
We've talked to a couple of friends of the victims and fellow explorers. One, his name was Matt Tulloch, and he said it was a fellow explorer of Paul-Henri Nargeolet, who was the former French naval diver who had been to the Titanic several times, according to Matt, more than anybody he knew, possibly 40 times. He said when he got the news that there was an implosion, he was sort of assured that there wasn't suffering involved, although we're still not clear on the timeline of when the implosion happened. When I asked him how he thought his friend Paul-Henri Nargeolet would like to be remembered, he said, well, I don't know if he even would want to be remembered because he had such a small ego despite all of his experience. But he said he really enjoyed sharing the knowledge he had, and he'd probably like to be remembered as someone who had continued the story of the Titanic. John?
CBS News correspondent Roxana Saberi, thank you. And later this hour, we'll speak with Will Conan, who you just saw in Roxana's piece, about the safety concerns he raised in 2018 and what this means for the future of deep water expeditions. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed a joint session of Congress Thursday, shortly after being welcomed to the White House by President Biden as part of a state visit. Human rights groups have accused Modi of discriminating against his country's Muslim population and silencing dissent. Modi, who has also overseen a crackdown on the free press, made the rare concession of answering unscripted questions from reporters at the White House. Both he and Mr. Biden sidestepped questions about humanitarian concerns in India and instead focused on their nation's economic partnership.
And with this visit, we're demonstrating once more how India and the United States are collaborating on nearly every human endeavor and delivering progress across the board.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes has more on Modi's stay in Washington.
Namaskar.
He's been accused of dismantling democracy in India. And yet, Washington rolled out the red carpet today for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Tonight, he'll be treated to a rare state dinner, a sign of how crucial his friendship is as the U.S. competes with India's neighbor, China.
We're straightforward with each other, and we respect each other.
Under Modi's leadership, India's government has undermined elections, press freedom, the judicial system, and the rights of the country's Muslim minority.
Democracy runs in our veins.
For one of the first times ever today, Modi had to face a group of reporters and take a question about that.
There are many human rights groups who say that your government has discriminated against religious minorities and sought to silence its critics.
He denied all of it.
Values, there is absolutely no discrimination, neither on basis of caste, creed, or age.
President Biden took questions too, defending his decision this week to describe China's president, Xi Jinping, as a dictator. China called his comments absurd and irresponsible.
Saying what I think is the facts with regard to the relationship with India, with China, is just not something I'm going to change very much.
And Nancy Cordes joins me now from the White House. Nancy, is there something in particular that the Biden administration wants out of this visit, or is it merely good relations with India?
Well, there's really a lot of action items that came out of this meeting, John. The leaders were filled with news about all the agreements that they had struck when it comes to semiconductors, building jet engines in India. That was something that the Indian government was working on with GE, AI, space exploration, all kinds of areas where the two leaders say that they can work together. But more broadly, you're right, what they're trying to do is send a message, the U.S. at least, that they've got a close friend and ally in India, and that should make China somewhat concerned. And we've been seeing this systematically from the U.S. since the beginning of the Biden administration, really building up their relationships not only with India, but with other Asian nations, with South Korea, with Japan, with Australia. We're seeing them strike the same kinds of deals over building submarines, creating new alliances. This has really been a major piece of the Biden strategy since the beginning, as they seek to send a message to what they see as a somewhat belligerent China bulking up its military.
And as a part of that strategy, the president has at times spoken eloquently about democracy versus autocracy. So then, how notable is it that he's downplayed those topics with respect to this relationship with India?
It's very notable. You're right. How many times have we heard him give a variation of that speech talking about how democracy versus autocracy is the fight of our times? And yet, most human rights leaders would argue that Narendra Modi has overseen what they describe as a slide into autocracy, which is very striking for a democratic nation like India. But this is realpolitik. The U.S. makes friends all over the world who have some practices that it doesn't like. Think of Saudi Arabia, for example, a key ally in the Middle East. The U.S. turns a blind eye to some of its human rights abuses because it's such a vital strategic partner. And the president is doing the same here. In fact, it's not just the president. It's the Speaker of the House. It's the lawmakers who sat and applauded in Congress listening to Narendra Modi speak. It's just such a vital country to U.S. interests right now. Not only is it the most populous nation in the world, but at some point it may be the biggest economy in the world. It is moving in that direction, and the U.S. wants to keep India close because the alternative is an estranged India and an estranged China.
Speaking of estranged China, the president was estranging it more with Xi Jinping reiterating that he was a dictator. How does that work at cross purposes, or does it not? Does it affirm the fact that the Secretary of State was just over in China trying to calm things in that relationship?
It does seem like the kind of thing that sort of slipped out. The president was at a fundraiser in California a few days ago, and he sort of offhandedly described the Chinese President Xi Jinping as a dictator, which is sort of saying the quiet part out loud. There are lots of experts who would describe Xi Jinping as a dictator, but it's not the kind of thing that you typically hear a U.S. president say out loud, especially when they are trying to mend a pretty fraught relationship with China. But the president was given an opportunity to take it back. He said he's not going to.
Indeed. Nancy Cordes at the White House. Thanks so much, Nancy.
You're welcome, John.
House Ways and Means Committee Chair Republican Jason Smith says the Biden family has received preferential treatment from the IRS and the Department of Justice, and he says he has testimony to back up that claim. On Thursday, Smith's committee released transcripts of interviews from 2 IRS whistleblowers who allege misconduct in the handling of investigations into the Biden family. Smith says those transcripts prove that prosecutors did not want to explore questions about the alleged criminal involvement of President Biden. U.S. Attorney David Weiss, a Trump appointee, has said that he had complete authority over the investigations. He may now have to answer questions from Congress about his actions. Family members of Republican Congressman George Santos have been identified as his bail backers. The freshman was indicted last month on 13 counts of fraud, money laundering, and theft of public funds. His father and aunt guaranteed his $500,000 bond. The two are only required to pay money if Santos violates the terms of his release. The congressman spoke with CBS's Nicole Killian this afternoon, where he expressed frustration with their names being released.
Quite frankly, to protect their security, I would have turned myself into pre-trial detention if I had to. So, I mean, look.
Are you still willing to do that?
Now that's moot the point, right? Their identities are out there.
The New York representative has pleaded not guilty to all charges. His next court appearance is scheduled for June 30th. If convicted, Santos could face up to 20 years in prison. Parts of Texas can't catch a break from weather extremes. What's in store in the coming days for a region battered by heat and powerful storms? And later, the Supreme Court is expected to hand down several major decisions later this month. We'll have a preview. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. A Moscow court has ruled that Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich must remain in jail until at least late August. Gershkovich attended Thursday's hearing from the prisoner's dock. His parents were also in the courtroom. The 31-year-old U.S. citizen was arrested in late March while on a reporting trip and charged with espionage. Allegations denied by the U.S. government and the Wall Street Journal. He faces up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Gershkovich is the first foreign accredited journalist to be charged by Russia with spying since the Cold War. Russia is claiming that Ukraine hit a key bridge linking Russia to Crimea. The bridge is the shortest route to the front lines in the south of Ukraine from Russian-occupied Crimea. Ukraine has stepped up attacks on Crimea, and officials say Ukrainian forces are trying to disrupt Russian supply routes. Russia says no one was hurt in the attack. Now to the 2024 presidential race, where yet another candidate has joined the Republican field. Former three-term Congressman Will Hurd of Texas announced his bid Thursday. He's a former CIA officer who calls himself a dark horse candidate. In his announcement on CBS Mornings, Hurd called former President Trump a failed politician and criticized his handling of classified materials.
The fact that Donald Trump willingly kept that material and he wants to be the leader of the free world is unacceptable to me.
Another Republican hopeful businessman, Vivek Ramaswamy, also shared criticisms of former President Trump on Thursday. Here's some of what he told our Nicole Killian.
I think there's a difference between a bad judgment and a breakage of the law. I would have made different judgments than Donald Trump did. That is why I am running against him and every other candidate.
Ramaswamy and Hurd join this list of GOP candidates. There are now about a dozen of them, and we are almost running out of room on our graphic. CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa joins me now from Washington. Bob, thank you for joining us. Will Hurd, okay, another candidacy, but aimed at Donald Trump, and he has that CIA background. He's a long shot, but is there a cumulative nature of all of these now anti-Trump critics who are running against him and being vocal about it?
John, it's good to be with you. If this trend continues, I feel like I'm going to be on your program reporting on rumors about John Dickerson being drafted into the New Hampshire primary, a late entry as a nonpartisan,
if drafted, I will
candidate.
not run.
John, just because you say that doesn't mean there's not a groundswell for you to jump in. But what we're really looking here is a fluid Republican presidential race, a fluid presidential race across the board. Congressman Hurd is someone I've covered in the House. Why is he jumping in now? Because he sees an opening, and he calls himself a dark horse candidate, but he believes that this race is open enough to have a late entry. I just sat down with former National Security Advisor to Trump, John Bolton, now a Trump critic, and he said he's on the edge of the water looking in, whether he should jump in and have his own late entry, because they're seeing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis not gaining enormous traction against Trump. And as DeSantis struggles to really define himself as the Trump alternative in this race, others who are maybe in the single digits are saying to themselves, why not? Get on that debate stage, try to generate some momentum, and if Trump's indicted again in Georgia or indicted in the January 6th case on the federal level, who knows how that plays out? So they're willing to roll the dice.
Rich Lowry, the editor-in-chief of the National Review, wrote in Politico, he wrote this about Donald Trump. He said, the essential challenge for the GOP is that Republicans are growing more attached to a candidate who is harder to elect. Karl Rove, former advisor to George W. Bush, made basically the similar argument in the Wall Street Journal. Is that making any headway among those people you're talking to, this idea that basically Donald Trump's indictments make him even more unelectable in a general?
I think it's harder for the Republican voter that I've encountered out there in the trail to remove themselves from Trump because he is not just a candidate they like or they share his grievance. He's a global celebrity. And it's very hard to run against a global celebrity. It's hard for these rivals to mount an ideological case against him because so much of his appeal comes from his personality, his handling of different conflicts and battles politically and personally. That grievance is something that cements people with Trump. And they're not really looking at the details of these indictments. For any other candidate, it would be so serious, you would wonder how they could stay in the race if they're facing they had a federal arraignment just weeks before the first presidential debate. But when I talk to these campaigns, John, they really haven't figured out how to run against someone who is a celebrity and plays by an entirely different set of rules, even though we're almost a decade now into the Trump era inside the Republican Party.
And you spoke with Ralph Reed, the head of the Faith and Freedom Coalition. D.C. candidates are going to talk to his organization. And traditionally, under a traditional race, they might jockey on social issues and reach out to those evangelical voters. But put this outreach in the context you just gave us about Donald Trump. Are there inroads with those voters? And if so, what issues could they take advantage of?
I had a fascinating conversation with Ralph Reed, who's been around religious voters for a long time. And what it comes down to is this. Donald Trump doesn't share the profile of most religious voters in American politics, especially in the Republican Party. But they are sick and tired of losing. And so when they went with Santorum in 2012, or they went with Huckabee in 2008, or Ted Cruz in 2016, they didn't see someone who had the ability politically to carry the ball across the line. Trump, for all of his problems legally, morally, in their view, it doesn't matter because they've made a bargain with him to overhaul the federal judiciary, to overturn Roe v. Wade. And because he delivered on policy, there's a very limited window for people to jump in and say he's not doing enough. Pence and others are saying he's not conservative enough on abortion, but Trump just comes back and says, well, I nominated justices who overturn this law that this ruling that you've been talking about for 50 years. So for even religious voters, if they don't like the indictment, if they don't love how Trump's talked about women, and they look at the E. Jean Carroll case, they still see him as someone who has a deliverable when it comes to policy, and he's offered that to them before, and they like that.
And as a former pro-choice candidate, he has shown he's been able to change his views quickly to win their support. Robert Costa, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, John.
One issue that will factor, as Bob said, in the 2024 election is abortion. In a recent CBS News poll, 46% said they are more likely to vote for a candidate who wants to protect abortion access. 36% said they would vote for a candidate who wants to restrict abortion access. 18% say it doesn't factor at all in their decision. Most Democrats say they are either worried or frustrated with the ongoing abortion debate. Republicans are also most likely to say they're frustrated. A small percentage of voters polled in both parties say they're tired of the debate. Thursday, NASCAR lent Pennsylvania repair crews a powerful tool to help get the I-95 highway reopened. The vehicle that's coming to the rescue is a red Chevy Silverado with a helicopter engine mounted to it that blows air 140 times hotter than a hairdryer. Ahead of possible storms this weekend, the NASCAR jet dryer, which is used to make tracks safe after rain, is meant to keep the asphalt dry so crews can stripe the roads. A portion of I-95 collapsed about 2 weeks ago after a tractor-trailer accident. Officials had originally predicted it would take months to rebuild the highway, used by an estimated 160,000 people a day. Now, Pennsylvania's Department of Transportation says temporary lanes should be open to drivers Friday. Gladys Knight and Bette Miller are among those who have been celebrated at the Kennedy Center Honors. So who will join them in the ranks? We'll take a look at the 2023 honorees. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. Welcome back to CBS News Primetime. I'm John Dickerson. Here's a look at our top stories. President Biden hosted India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House for a state visit Thursday. The two leaders discussed a variety of topics, including climate change and India's human rights record. This is President Biden's third time hosting a state visit since taking office. Facebook and Instagram will no longer allow content from news organizations on its platforms in Canada. Parent company Meta on Thursday said the move was in response to a new law that requires the sites to pay publishers for their content. The Coast Guard says the 5 passengers on the Titanic submersible have died. Officials were able to locate a debris field Thursday and said the sub at some point imploded. It's not clear if their bodies can be recovered. Will Conan joins us now. He's president and CEO of Hydrospace Group, which specializes in engineering pressure vehicles for human capacity. Will, first, I'd like to get your reaction to Thursday's news.
Yeah, this has been a very sad day. We've been on pins and needles for days, and in hearing the Coast Guard announcement this morning. I've been doing this for a few hours now, trying to find a word that's just stronger than tragic. This is very tragic. This is the single biggest incident in our industry of submersibles since 1960. That's 60 years. This has never happened. We've had some fatalities, 4 fatalities in the 1970s through 3 different events, and here in a single event, we have this is more than all the rest combined. So it is very sad. They're all colleagues. I mean, this is a small community. The families are it's just devastating for the families. And look, there is a world of engineers and professionals that gathers. I'm chairman of the submersible committee within the Marine Technology Society, which has been around since 1968. We gather, we discuss, we review designs, regulations. We are close to this. We have safe regulations, and it is a battle between pushing the boundary of innovation and regulation. One is too slow, one is too fast, and finding the balance. It's tricky for any industry of finding that balance. And sadly, in the world of deep ocean, and this is very, very deep, even in our industry, this is very deep. There's only 10 vehicles that in the entire world that can go to this depth. And the
do you have a sense, Will, of what do you have a theory about what might have happened, and do you think there's any way to ever know?
Yeah, I think we will know. I mean, they will be picking up the pieces. We will see what one of the issues is seeing what the debris field is down there. We have some amazing technology on the seafloor with the remotely operated vehicles. I mean, these are very dexterous machines that can take photographs, video, and pick up some of the parts. But look, when something like that happens, when they call it a catastrophic implosion, that just means an underwater explosion, just inwards, and that means something gave way. And if they have the front and the back pieces, as those were made out of titanium, it appears that the central part just gave way.
You were involved in, and help me understand this, you were involved in writing a letter in 2018 that raised some safety concerns with OceanGate. Were those concerns addressed? How much should we understand this past history in evaluating the safety of this trip and whether any gates were blown that should have been paid attention to before launching?
You know, it's a very fair question, and that adds to the tragedy, right? Because since the Roman times, human beings have figured out how to go to the deep ocean. We know how to do this. We go to 20,000 feet all the time, reliably, safely. We have a solution. It is a process. In 2018, here, our committee meets every year. It's our 20th anniversary this year. We're going to have a big celebration. I'm afraid that's going to be significantly dampened here. But in 2018, after the 3 days, many people, senior experts from around the world, will coming and say, "Hey, Will, what do we do? I think this is serious. I mean, do they know what they're doing, and do they know the risks they are taking?" And we figured, what are we going to do? Do we stay silent? Do we say something? And I drafted the letter. I passed it around my colleagues, and more than 24 people signed the letter. And it basically said, look, we suggest what was concerning is the strategy of bypassing the existing safety check procedure. We call that classification, and that's where a third-party outside agency comes in and reviews a design, reviews the drawings, inspects the construction and the testing to ensure everything is done properly. And it's considered an imposition, but at the same time, it's a bit of, call it, engineering crowdsourcing, where you have a lot of people checking over and making sure you don't miss anything. And at 4,000 meters, at 12,000 feet, I say, I call it Father Neptune here, doesn't care much for puny humans. I mean, you make a small mistake and it gets costly.
And so, Will, help us understand the tension between, as you say, regulations and having a third party look at safety. Is it that imposes a cost? Is it that imposes restrictions that make it hard to have a commercial enterprise that is enjoyable for passengers? What is the tension that's at play?
Well, look, every industry has a tension between innovators and regulators, right? I mean, one moves too slow, the other one moves too fast. And that's one of the issues we have within the committee, to bring all the stakeholders at the table and say, okay, how do we do this careful dance between the two to find a happy medium? And I mean, all industries face the similar challenges. And we are very open to innovation. In fact, we've been doing this for 30 years. I mean, there's been some amazing innovations in the submarine world in the last 20 years. The problem is, part of OceanGate's philosophy, their reaction to the letter was, well, no, I think we got it. I think we got it. Thank you anyway. I think we have a better and faster method. And, I keep saying the same thing. We're parents, we have children. What do you do when your teenagers get into really, really bad trouble, despite the biggest love and sincere advice you give them that go unheeded? And what are you left with? You're just left with empty, right? It's lose, lose, lose. And then you still feel, well, what more could we have done? It is so profoundly sad. And because this was preventable, to answer your question, yes, the putting it through this review process and classification, and I mean, that's done by outside parties. These are international organizations that review oil platforms, super tankers, submarines. And I mean, they are knowledgeable. It does take time and it does cost money. So there is a tendency to try and just get it done better and faster. And, the mistakes, we say in our industry, the rules we have, there's a lot of them. I mean, the rules are written in blood, right? I mean, why is it in there? Well, why do we know this? Well, because things happen. I mean, I think we will add some things to the books, but this is a very sad way of doing this, and I think this was preventable.
Indeed it is. Will, you've spoken very eloquently and humanly, and as a part of that community, we're sorry for your loss. Will Conan, President and CEO of Hydrospace Group, thank you so much for being with us and helping us understand this. In the middle of a heat wave, parts of Texas were battered by severe storms Thursday. At least 4 people were killed in the small town of Matador. Fire officials say the area was hit by an unprecedented tornado that damaged power lines and turned homes into piles of rubble. Jason Allen from our CBS station in Dallas has more.
The tornado touched down around 8 p.m.
The damage is just very extensive. I mean, it came straight through Matador
and turned the town inside out. A mural called Saturday Night in Matador, Texas, exposed by Wednesday's wicked weather in a cafe owned by the mayor.
Did you have any sort of warning that it was coming?
Maybe 30 seconds. I went to the back door and I opened it and I looked and I seen it and I tried to shut it and the door blew back off both hinges. It's devastating for the whole community. I mean, we need prayers.
Entire blocks were completely leveled.
There's somebody at this house over here motioning us to come over.
Storm chasers from CBS affiliate KWTV helped a man reach his wife, who was stuck under what was left of their home. They say she didn't survive.
This town has got a lot of homes like this.
Clayt Hill's son, Calby, was working at the Dollar General. He called his father just before the tornado hit.
He was on the phone with me the whole time, and it hit, and I could hear it. And it was a terrible sound.
Calby was buried in debris. He survived. In Colorado, hail pummeled concertgoers at Red Rocks Amphitheater.
We grabbed our stuff, got up, and it just opened up, and it was like
horrible. It was so painful.
It was like bullets hitting your skin.
Nearly 100 people were injured. 7 went to the hospital.
There were just medics everywhere tending to people, and there were tears and crying and panic attacks.
Back in Texas, the heat wave continues, smashing records, while more than 100,000 customers are without power and AC.
In this rural part of the state, I've had people tell me today they couldn't afford to carry insurance that would have covered losses like this. And with a tornado that was this big, this strong, we haven't seen people so much salvaging things from this as they have been just pushing back piles of debris and thinking about starting over. John?
Jason Allen in Matador, Texas. Thank you. We're awaiting a handful of Supreme Court rulings that will affect millions of Americans. Decisions are expected next week in 2 cases involving race-conscious college admission policies. Other rulings, including the fate of President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, which could affect more than 40 million Americans, and how much power state legislatures have to regulate federal elections. The justices will also decide a First Amendment case that challenges a Colorado state law banning discrimination based on sexual orientation. Check your freezers. We have a new recall coming up after the break. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. If you like to start your day with a smoothie, then you may want to check where you're getting your frozen fruit from. The FDA announced a voluntary recall Wednesday of plastic bags of frozen fruit due to a possible listeria contamination. The recall affects products found in several major food outlets, including brands sold at Walmart and Whole Foods. As of Wednesday, there were no recorded illnesses. The FDA urges people concerned about listeria infection to contact a doctor, and they have a list of the brands on the FDA website. According to the Agriculture Department, nearly 34 million people, including 5 million children, experienced food insecurity in the United States in 2021. Addressing a growing food crisis was one of the topics discussed at the Wall Street Journal's Global Food Forum in Chicago this week. Food and agricultural leaders came together to discuss an array of challenges ranging from labor shortages to consumer health. Jesse Newman was there, reporting for the Wall Street Journal, and Jesse joins me now. Jesse, let's start with the farmers. What are the biggest challenges that they're facing right now?
Hey, John, I would say there are 2 things that they really focused on. So the first, they're pretty concerned about the weather this year. There is a drought, severe drought that's gripping the Midwest. And we heard from an Illinois corn and soybean farmer who talked about the impact that they're already experiencing and expecting to see on their corn yields. She said that they haven't had any measurable rain since Mother's Day. So that's already affecting yields in the cornfields. And then, there was a cattle farmer as well who also described, what drought conditions have done in prior years, and then labor as well. All of the farmers, we heard from a dairy farmer or a dairy cooperative, and this corn and soybean farmer, and all about the challenges that they face finding labor. We heard from a California producer who discussed how really asparagus and table grapes, these just aren't crops that are grown in California very much anymore as a result of labor constraints. So those are the two big topics for them.
Wow. All right, let's break those down. Let me start with labor, if I may. So what's is there an obvious solution? Is there a specific thing that they're complaining about? Give us a little more on the labor question.
Yeah, it's really a labor shortages. They aren't able to find enough people to milk their cows and to pick grapes in fields. There's obviously they are, one of the cattle farmers was telling us about how this year he's been bringing in farm workers and their families from South Africa. So having to go as far as South Africa to find people to work on his farm. And, he talked about how as soon as folks come here and he gets them settled and, and trained, they essentially have to go home. So, that's just a lack of people is really what it boils down to.
And now on the climate question, there's an acute situation this year, but it feels like we're having acute situations every year, which leads to the larger question of global warming and climate change. How much was it a discussion of the specific challenges of the moment, and how much was it the challenges of a warming planet?
Certainly they were both on the table. I think that the immediacy of this year's drought was something that we heard about time and time again on several panels. We did, there were panels that touched on climate change. I will say I wasn't at all of the panels throughout the day, but there was talk about just more erratic weather. Some of the farmers discussed how there's just fewer planting days in the Midwest as a result of climate change and just much more erratic weather patterns and sort of more rainfall than they're typically used to.
And just very briefly, there was a discussion about certain foods and how they affect your health. Explain what that means.
Yeah, that's right. There was a lot of focus on sort of a new buzzword, ultra-processed foods. And we had CEOs from a number of different packaged food companies that were weighing in. And, these are foods that are made with highly processed ingredients. And there's a lot of concern these days about the poor health outcomes that these foods lead to because they're making up such a big part of our diet, about 60% of an adult diet and 70% of a kid's diet. So just a look at the health impacts and what the food industry is doing to combat it.
Wall Street Journal reporter Jesse Newman. That was really interesting. Thanks a lot, Jesse.
Thanks, John.
4.5 seconds, barely enough time to put your shoes on or throw on a coat. But one young man shows us he can solve quite a bit of in that tiny time frame. That story is ahead. You're streaming CBS News Primetime. That's legendary pop singer Dionne Warwick, one of the 5 Kennedy Center honorees this year. The awards celebrate icons in the performing arts for a lifetime of contributions to American culture. And this year's class spans generations and multiple genres of art. They include Barry Gibb, a founding member of the Bee Gees, acclaimed soprano Renee Fleming, rapper, singer, and actor Queen Latifah, and actor and comedian Billy Crystal. You can watch the event on CBS on December 3rd. As we mentioned before, before we went to break, I should say, you can't do a lot in 4 seconds unless you are 9-year-old Yi-Hong Wong. He's broken the world record for the fastest average time to solve this puzzle cube. 5 of his solves averaged out to 4.48 seconds, and 2 of them came in under 4 seconds. He broke the previous world record, which he himself had set just 3 months ago. Up next, it's CBS Reports. For all of us here at CBS News Primetime, that's our report. I'm John Dickerson. Thank you for spending the hour with us.